I never thought a stranger could change my life in just one day. But that morning was different from the start. The air felt heavier, almost warning me of something. I was standing in my driveway sipping my coffee when I saw a man I had never seen before walking toward me. He wore a faded uniform shirt with HO printed on a cheap badge. His cap was tilted, his sunglasses hiding his eyes. He looked official, but there was something about his expression. Something sharp and cold that made me uneasy. He didn't smile or greet me. Instead, he glanced at my car parked in front of my house and immediately frowned. "You can't park here. This is against the HOA rules," he said in a tone that was more of a threat than a warning. I was confused. I'd been living here for 3 years, parking in the same spot every day. No one had ever complained. I told him politely that I hadn't broken any rules, but his voice grew louder. "You think you know the rules? I am the rules here," he snapped. My stomach tightened. I didn't like his attitude, but I didn't want to argue. I simply nodded and said I would look into it. He stared at me for a moment too long before walking away slowly, his boots hitting the pavement in a heavy rhythm, as if to remind me of his presence. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. From my window, I caught glimpses of him talking to neighbors, pointing toward my house, whispering something. With a smirk, later that evening, I called the official HOA office to check if there were any new rules I didn't know about. To my surprise, they told me they hadn't sent anyone to inspect our street and no such complaint existed. "Are you sure you spoke to an actual HOA officer?" the woman on the phone asked, her tone carrying concern. My heart skipped a beat. If he wasn't real, then why was he here, and what did he want? The thought kept me restless that night. I tried to ignore it, telling myself maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but my mind kept replaying his face, the way he looked at my car like it had done something to him. The next morning, I found him standing near my driveway again, arms crossed. This time he didn't speak, just stared, a long, unblinking stare that made my skin crawl. I asked if he needed something. He smirked and said, "You'll see," then walked away, leaving me with a deep, uneasy pit in my stomach. For the next few days, strange things began happening. A scratch appeared on the side of my car. My mailbox was left open with my letters scattered on the ground. I suspected him but had no proof. My friends told me to let it go. But I knew this was only the beginning. On the 5th morning, I woke up to the sound of metal crunching, a sickening noise that froze me in place. I ran outside barefoot, my heart pounding, and there it was. My car, the front completely smashed, the hood bent upward like a broken jaw, shards of glass glittering. On the driveway, I stood there in shock, my breath caught in my throat, unable to move, and then, from the corner of my eye, I saw him leaning casually against the lamppost, a satisfied grin on his face, as if he had been waiting for this moment. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come out. Instead, he just tipped his cap, turned around and walked away without saying a word, leaving me with the wreckage of my car and the terrifying realization that this man wasn't just pretending to be HOA. He was here for something far more personal, and I had no idea why. Imagine waking up and seeing your hard work lying in ruins. That's exactly how I felt standing there barefoot on my driveway, staring at my smashed car. My mind couldn't process it. My hands were trembling, my chest felt heavy, and my legs weak. Neighbors began stepping out of their houses, whispering to each other, some looking at me with sympathy while others avoided my eyes as if they didn't want to get involved. I bent down and touched the broken pieces of glass. They were cold and sharp, just like the moment I was living through. I looked up and he was gone. The man who had been there moments ago had disappeared as if he'd never been there. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me, but I forced myself to move. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice shaky as I explained what happened. They said they'd send an officer. While I waited, I walked around the car trying to see if there was any clue, a footprint, a tool, anything, but it was just destruction, pure and deliberate. When the police arrived, I told them about the man pretending to be HOA. I described his uniform, his badge, his attitude, but when they asked for his name or proof, I realized I had nothing solid, just my words against a ghost. The officer took some pictures, wrote a report, and promised to look into it, but I could tell from his tone that it wasn't a priority. After they left, I decided to call the official HOA office again. This time I demanded answers. The woman on the phone was firm. We do not have any officer matching that description, and no one has been assigned to your street. Please be careful, sir. Her words made my skin crawl. If he wasn't real, what was he, and why target me? Later that day, I saw him again, not on my property but standing across the street, talking to my neighbor. They laughed about something, and then he pointed directly at me. I could feel the heat rising in my face. I wanted to walk over there and confront him, but I stopped myself. Something told me that was exactly what he wanted. I went inside, shut the door and sat down, my mind spinning. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt like footsteps. Every shadow felt like him watching. At around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "You should have listened." My heart dropped. I quickly typed back asking who it was. But there was no reply. The next morning, I decided to ask around. Maybe someone else had dealt with him before. Maybe I wasn't the only target. I spoke to a kind elderly woman 2 houses down. Her voice was low, almost like she was afraid to be overheard. She told me that the same man had once harassed her about her garden, claiming it violated HOA rules. When she refused to pay a fine he demanded, she found her garden vandalized the next day. She said she never told anyone because she was scared. My stomach churned. It was the same pattern. Intimidation followed by destruction. I asked if she knew his name. She hesitated and then shook her head. "It's better if you stop looking," she whispered before closing her door. That only made me more determined. Later that afternoon, I spotted him again, this time walking alone toward the end of the street. I grabbed my phone and started recording from a distance, just in case. But he must have sensed it because he suddenly turned his head, looked directly at me and smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that made me freeze. Then he raised his hand and made a motion like smashing something, before disappearing behind the corner. I didn't understand why he hated me so much, but one thing was clear, he was escalating, and if I didn't find a way to stop him soon, I might lose more than just my car. That night, as I was locking my front door, I noticed an envelope sticking out from under it. My hands shook as I picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "Next time it won't be the car." My blood ran cold. I looked around the street but saw no one. I knew then that this was no longer about HOA, no longer about rules. This was personal, and it was only going to get worse. Sometimes the past holds answers and dangerous secrets, and I was starting to believe that if I wanted to stop him, I had to dig deeper into who he really was. So the morning after receiving that chilling note, I decided I couldn't sit quietly anymore. The fear in my stomach was still there, but it was now mixed with anger. I began by talking to a few trusted neighbors. Most of them hesitated to speak, but one man across the street named David agreed to tell me what he knew. We sat in his garage with the door half closed, his voice low, like he was afraid someone would hear. He told me the man's name was Ryan, though he wasn't sure if it was his real one. Years ago, Ryan had lived in another neighborhood nearby, where he pulled the same fake HOA tricks, harassing residents, demanding fines, and punishing anyone who refused to pay. One night a family's fence was torn down, and their car keyed. Everyone knew it was him, but no one could prove it because he was careful. He never got caught. David said that eventually the neighborhood forced him out, but not before he caused several families to move away just to escape him. My chest felt heavy as I realized I wasn't the first victim. I asked David why no one had gone to the policey side, and said Ryan had friends in places that made people believe nothing would happen to him. Some even whispered he had a cousin in law enforcement who always helped him out when he got in trouble. I didn't know if that was true, but the thought made my skin crawl. I decided to collect proof this time, so I began carrying my phone everywhere, recording whenever I saw him in public. But Ryan seemed to know when he was being watched. Every time I lifted my phone, he would just smile, that same smug smile, and walk away like he had all the time in the world. One evening, while scrolling through old community Facebook posts, I found a thread from 3 years ago. A woman in another part of town was warning people about a man posing as HOA. Her description was identical to Ryan's, the same uniform, the same badge, even the same sunglasses. My heart pounded as I saved screenshots of every comment. I reached out to the woman privately, and she agreed to talk. We met at a small coffee shop away from my neighborhood. She told me Ryan had targeted her after she refused to pay a fake fine for leaving her trash bins out overnight. The next morning her car windows were smashed and her dog's leash was cut loose in the yard. She found her pet scared and shivering behind the house. She said she reported it, but nothing happened. That story made my hands shake, not just with fear, but with rage. How could someone like this keep doing the same thing over and over without consequences? When I got home that night, There was another surprise waiting for me on my porch, a small cardboard box, no return address. Inside was a single broken toy car smashed flat under what looked like a hammer and a sticky note that read, "Stop digging." My mind raced. I was being watched closely. Every move I made was noticed. I checked my security cameras, but somehow the footage for the last 2 hours was missing. I didn't understand how until I remembered Ryan once lingering near the side of my house. Maybe he had tampered with it. My paranoia grew. I started locking every door and window twice before bed. And still I felt unsafe. One late night, I was reviewing the screenshots I'd collected when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo someone had taken of me earlier that day walking out of the coffee shop with the woman I'd interviewed. My stomach dropped. That meant Ryan either followed me or had someone watching me. The text with the photo simply said, "Wrong move." I couldn't ignore the danger anymore. The next morning, I decided to go to the police again, this time armed with names, dates, screenshots, and witness stories. The officer listened carefully, but then told me without direct evidence of him committing the act in my neighborhood, they couldn't arrest him yet. It was frustrating, but at least I had it documented. The officer suggested I be careful and maybe consider moving somewhere safer, but that only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to be chased out of my own home. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I caught sight of Ryan again, standing 2 houses down, leaning against a tree, just watching me. I stared back, refusing to look away. Eventually, he smirked, turned, and walked off into the shadows, leaving me with the chilling certainty that he knew I was trying to expose him, and he was planning his next move. The game between us had just turned into a war, and I wasn't sure who would win. I decided that if Ryan wanted a fight, I would give him one, but on my terms, not his. So I started thinking about how to catch him in the act. I couldn't just wait for him to strike again and hope for witnesses. I needed undeniable proof that even his so-called connections couldn't erase. The plan began simple. I bought 2 new security cameras, this time hidden so well he wouldn't notice, one disguised as a garden light facing the driveway, and another inside a fake birdhouse near my front porch. I also borrowed a small motion-activated camera from my friend, which I placed in my car facing out through the windshield. For a week, I acted as if I'd given up. No police visits, no asking questions around the neighborhood. I even avoided looking in Ryan's direction when I saw him pass by, but inside I was watching every move he made. My heart still raced every time I stepped outside, half expecting to see a smashed window or a threatening note, but nothing happened at first. Then, on the 8th night, just past midnight, the garden light camera detected movement. My phone buzzed with an alert, and when I opened the live feed, I saw Ryan creeping toward my driveway, his shadow long and slow under the streetlight. He looked around carefully, then stepped closer to my car. I could see something metallic in his hand. I couldn't tell if it was a crowbar or a wrench. My pulse exploded in my ears. I dialed 911 quietly as I kept watching, but before I could finish the call, he froze and turned his head slightly toward the garden light camera. For a terrifying second, I thought he'd spotted it, but instead he stepped back toward the side of my house, disappearing from view. I rushed to the front window, and there he was, walking toward my porch. My mind screamed to stay quiet, but my body moved on instinct. I grabbed the baseball bat from behind the door and stood still in the dark, breathing slowly. His silhouette appeared in the frosted glass of my front door, and I saw his hand reaching up toward the handle. That's when the birdhouse camera caught him clearly pulling something from his pocket. It looked like a small black box. Later, I would realize it was a signal jammer meant to disable cameras and alarms. My heart thudded so loud I thought he could hear it. Suddenly he stepped back, glanced at my windows, and turned to leave, but not before leaning toward the door and whispering something I couldn't hear. The next morning I reviewed all the footage, and it was gold. The garden light cam had him near my car. The birdhouse cam had his face in full view. I called the police again, feeling confident, but they said it wasn't enough since he hadn't actually damaged anything yet. They advised me to stay cautious. I hung up, furious. If the law couldn't stop him now, I would have to set the stage for him to incriminate himself. My friend David helped me design a bait. We decided to leave an expensive-looking box in plain sight inside my car with the doors locked and the motion camera running from inside. It was a decoy filled with old electronics wrapped to look like brand new gadgets. The hope was that Ryan's ego would make him try something. Within 2 nights, it happened at 3 a.m. The motion cam lit up, recording Ryan circling my car, glancing over his shoulder before pulling a slim tool from his pocket. In less than a minute, he popped the lock, opened the door, and grabbed the box. I wanted to run outside screaming, but I forced myself to stay hidden, letting the camera do its job. He closed the door quietly and walked off carrying the fake prize. As if nothing had happened, I sent the footage straight to the police and waited for them to act, but hours passed with no word. Finally, late the next afternoon, I saw a patrol car driving slowly past my house. They stopped 2 doors down at David's place. I walked over, pretending it was just coincidence, and saw Ryan standing there smirking as 2 officers talked to him. One of them noticed me and told me to go back inside. I knew right then something was wrong, and my Stomach sank. Later that night, I got the confirmation in the worst way possible. My phone buzzed with a new message, no text, just a short video. It was Ryan standing in his dimly lit garage, holding the decoy box. He looked into the camera and said, "Nice try," before smashing it to pieces with a hammer. Then he leaned closer and added, "Next time I won't miss." My hands shook as the video ended because I realized the trap had worked in catching him on camera, but it had also told him I was fighting back. And now, whatever was coming next would be even more dangerous. That night, after watching Ryan's video over and over, I knew things had reached the point of no return. The fear I had been living with for weeks mixed with a deep anger that made my hands clench into fists. I decided I couldn't just wait for the next threat. I had to be ready for him. I double-checked every lock in the house, made sure my cameras were recording from multiple angles, and kept my phone fully charged. I even slept in the living room, with the lights low so I could see the front door. Clearly around 2 a.m. I heard a faint crunch of gravel outside my window, followed by slow footsteps. My pulse quickened. I picked up the baseball bat from beside me and moved silently toward the door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw him, Ryan, standing there in the shadows, his face half lit by the street lamp. He wasn't holding anything obvious, but his posture was tense, like he was waiting for me to open the door. I stayed silent. Then he suddenly banged his fist hard against the wood. The sound echoed through the house. "Come outside, we need to talk," he called in a voice that was calm but carried an edge that made my skin crawl. I didn't respond, so he banged again, this time harder. "You think you can set me up?" he growled. I grabbed my phone and started recording, then yelled back, "Leave my property now or I'm calling the police." He laughed a low, ugly laugh. "Go ahead, they won't do anything." That sentence made my stomach knot. He was so sure of himself, like he owned the situation. Then, without warning, he stepped back and kicked the door so hard the frame shook. I stumbled backward, but kept the camera steady. Just then lights flickered on in a few neighboring houses. I heard voices, people watching from their windows. Ryan noticed too and turned to them, shouting, "He's lying to you all. This guy's the problem." It was pure manipulation, but some of the neighbors started coming out onto their porches, phones in hand, recording the scene. Ryan must have realized this wasn't going his way, because he turned back to me and pointed a finger. "Last warning," he said, then started walking away. But halfway down the driveway, he stopped, looked at my car, and without hesitation swung something metallic into the side mirror, shattering it completely. The sound was like an explosion in my chest. That was my breaking point. I swung the door open and shouted for him to stop, but he spun around and charged toward me, closing the distance fast. I tightened my grip on the bat, ready to defend myself, but before he could reach me, flashing blue and red lights lit up the street. 2 police cars screeched to a halt, blocking him, and he froze for a second, then tried to bolt toward the backyards. But one officer was faster, tackling him to the ground as another shouted commands. The whole street was awake now, people filming from every angle, neighbors whispering to each other. I stood frozen in my doorway, still clutching the bat as the officers cuffed him. He was yelling the whole time, claiming I had attacked him first, that I was framing him, but this time the truth was on my side. Multiple neighbors stepped forward, showing the officers their own videos of him breaking my mirror, kicking my door, shouting threats. I finally stepped forward and handed them my phone with all the recordings from the past few weeks, including the bait box footage. The officers glanced at each other, and one of them nodded, as if to say this was the proof they had been waiting for. They led Ryan to the patrol car, but as they put him inside, he twisted his head to look at me, his eyes burning with hatred, and he mouthed 2 words I'll never forget: "Not over." Even with him in handcuffs, those words hit me like a cold wave, because I knew in my gut that as long as he had a way to reach me, this nightmare wasn't truly finished. Even with Ryan taken away that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that his words, "not over," were still echoing in my head. The street was quiet the next morning, but my mind was loud, replaying every moment of the past weeks, every threat, every smashed piece of my life. The police kept my phone overnight as evidence, and when I finally got it back, there were dozens of unread messages from neighbors, some thanking me for standing up to him, others confessing that they had also been victims but were too scared to speak. Until now, it felt strange to suddenly be the person they looked to for safety when I had felt so powerless myself. I spent the next few days fixing what I could, replacing my car mirror, repainting the door frame, but the emotional damage was harder to repair. I jumped at small noises and found myself looking over my shoulder constantly. One evening, about a week later, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the messy scrawl almost angry in its strokes. It was from Ryan. He wrote that he had lost everything. Because of me, his house, his job, his so-called friends. He said the footage I gave to the police and the community's videos had ruined his reputation completely. There was a strange mix in his words. Part of it sounded like an apology, but most of it felt like he was blaming me for his downfall. "I was just trying to teach people respect," he wrote. "But you turned everyone against me." I read it twice, trying to understand if he was sorry or just bitter. At the end, he wrote, "I won't bother you again." But even as I read that I couldn't trust it, I thought about taking the letter to the police, but in the end I kept it locked away as a reminder of how far this had gone. Weeks passed, and slowly the tension in the neighborhood eased. People started coming out, more kids played in the street again, neighbors smiled at me. When I passed by I felt a strange peace returning, but it was fragile. Like glass. One evening I stood in my driveway looking at my repaired car, the setting sun reflecting off its hood, and I realized I didn't hate Ryan anymore. I didn't forgive him for what he did, but I refused to let him live rent-free in my head any longer. The fear, the anger, the constant watching over my shoulder, it had drained me more than the damage ever did. So in my heart I decided to let go, not for him but for me, because holding on to that hate was like letting him win one last time. I went inside, closed the door, and for the first time in months slept through the night without waking at every sound. Maybe he truly was gone, maybe he meant it when he said he wouldn't bother me again, but part of me knew that if he ever tried to come back I wouldn't be the same scared person he first met. I had faced him, survived him, and learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply living free while they live in the shadow of their own regret.